Welcome back to the channel. This week we are going to talk about how to use the apex locator predictably in everyday clinical practice. If you're new to the channel, my name is Siju Jacob. I've been a private practitioner for the past 25 years in Bangalore and Dubai. I've been using a surgical microscope in my private practice for more than 20 years, and I've been training dentists how to incorporate the surgical microscope in everyday clinical practice for more than a decade. One of the most commonly requested topics for a video on our YouTube channel by our subscribers has been how to use the apex locator predictably in everyday clinical practice. You asked for it, so here it is. Let's have a look at how to use the apex locator. In the early days of endodontic therapy, the only method available for clinicians to estimate the working length was by radiographs. So we had to insert the file into the tooth, expose a radiograph, and then calculate the distance traveled by the file in relationship to the apex of the tooth on the radiograph, and then find out how much more we had to advance or retract. So this is how clinicians used to calculate the working length before the invention of apex locators. The problem with just relying on radiographs is that we have seen that the radiographic apex is not really where the canal ends. As seen in this diagram from Kotler in 1955, we see that the anatomical or the radiographic apex is not exactly where the canal ends, which is the apical constriction over here. So there is a fair degree of distance, and if we rely on just the radiographic apex, then more often than not, you will end up instrumenting the periapical areas rather than the canal itself. So one of the methods to overcome this is by using an apex locator. Apex locators were introduced in 1962 by Sunada. The earliest apex locators were based on electrical resistance and direct current. They weren't as accurate. It wasn't until 1991 when J. Morita introduced a new type of apex locator, which was based on differential impedance rather than electrical resistance. And from then on, technology has improved by leaps and bounds, and today we live in an era where electronic apex locators are extremely accurate. So we completely rely on them from the minute the file goes into the canal, and as the file progresses in the canal, we are able to calculate, or the apex locator gives us a reading as to where the file is in relationship to the apex. So these days, almost every single clinician relies on the apex locator far more than radiographs alone to estimate the working length. However, despite the electronic apex locators being extremely accurate these days, if one doesn't follow certain protocols, then one can get numerous errors while measuring the working length using apex locators. So in this video, we're going to talk about 6 protocols that you can follow in your clinical practice that will help you use the apex locator more predictably in everyday clinical practice. So let's have a look at what these 6 protocols are. By the way, I've put together a short PDF which you can download for free. Just check out the link in the description below this video, and you can download these protocols for free as a PDF, which you can keep in your clinic for ready reference. Have a look in the description below. The first protocol that we need to follow when we are using an apex locator in clinical practice is to avoid contact of the file with metallic restorations. When we say metallic restorations, it can mean metal ceramic crowns like these, where the metal is exposed while doing the access cavity, or it can even be silver amalgam restorations. So if you have a metal surface that is exposed, whether it's from a metal ceramic crown or a silver amalgam restoration, and the file that is going into the canal and is used for working length measurement touches this metal surface, then the apex locator can give variable results. It gives a reading as though it's already reached the apex, even when you are just in the coronal portion. So this is something that can give erratic readings and wrong readings. The apex locator is going to tell you that you've reached the apex when you've really just reached the coronal portion. So we need to prevent this, and the easiest way to prevent this is by using a gingival barrier to cover the exposed metal surfaces. And once we put a layer of gingival barrier or opal dam, then the file no longer contacts metal surface. It contacts the gingival barrier instead. So this is a very easy way to solve this problem of the apex locator giving you erratic readings when the file contacts metal surface. Just cover the whole metal surface with a gingival barrier. Second protocol to follow is not to use the apex locator when there is excessive bleeding or excessive tissue in the canal. So when you perform your access cavity and you see a very hyperemic pulp like this where there's excessive bleeding, then this is not an environment to take accurate measurements, because more often than not, the minute you put a file into the canal here, the apex locator is going to give you a reading as though you reached the apex. That's because of excessive bleeding. So we want to extirpate the pulp, wait for the bleeding to subside, and then take accurate measurements. So that's the second protocol. Even when you have lots of tissue, pulp tissue like this, sometimes you can get erratic readings. So it's always a good idea to extirpate this pulp first and then clean out the excess pulp tissue and then retake the measurement. Even if you've taken the measurement the first time, extirpate, do a gross extirpation first, remove excess tissue, and then take accurate working length measurements. By the way, the pictures that you see on your screen are all taken through the surgical microscope, and this is something that virtually any dentist can do in their clinical practice. So if you're a dentist who wants to learn how to use the surgical microscope and document like this, then do check out my online course, Microscopic Dentistry Simplified. It's a very simple course that I've put together that virtually any dentist can use and then incorporate the surgical microscope in their own clinical practice. Do check out the link in the description below. The third protocol that we can follow to enhance apex locator usage is not to use it in the presence of excess hypochlorite in the pulp chamber. Sodium hypochlorite is a very commonly used irrigant. However, when we have excess sodium hypochlorite like this, it can interfere in the usage of the apex locator. So it's always a good idea to flush out the extra hypochlorite with water from your 3-way syringe and then take the measurements with the apex locator. The fourth protocol that we can follow is not to take measurements when the canal is too dry or too wet. So if you have a situation like this, where the canals are absolutely dry, then it is not a conducive environment to use the apex locator. You want to make these canals slightly moist and then take your measurement. On the contrary, if you have a situation like this where you have lots of fluid in the pulp chamber, then again, it's not a conducive environment. So what you can do is blow a little bit of air from your triplex syringe to remove that, or just use a suction to remove a little bit of that excess fluid there, so that there is still a little bit of fluid in the canals and it's not too dry. Then that is a good environment to take measurements with the apex locator. So you don't want your canals to be absolutely dry, nor do you want excess fluid in the canals. So it has to be a balance before we start using the apex locator. The fifth protocol that enhances apex locator usage is to use an appropriately sized file while taking measurements in the canal. So you want to match the size or the diameter of the file with the diameter of the canal. So if it's a very narrow canal, then you want to use a smaller file. If it's a very large canal, then you want to use a larger file. The file should be snugly fit. It should not be too loose nor too tight. For example, as you see in these images, you have a file in the canal. You can see the size of the canal corresponds to the size of the file in the canal. The adjacent tooth is an open apex, so obviously any size file that you put here, because this file is loose compared to the apex of the canal, you are going to get erratic reading. So if you have a situation where the canal is too large and the file you're using is too small, then you will get erratic reading. Similarly, if you use a file that's too tight in the canal, then that too can lead to inaccurate measurements. So you want a file that's snugly fit, not too tight, not too loose. The sixth and final protocol that can help you take accurate measurements with the apex locator is to have 3 consistent measurements. So you want to have a situation where you insert the file into the canal, and as the file progresses in the canal, the apex locator will tell you when you reach the apex. And once you reach the apex, you want to measure this length. Let's say if you measure the working length to be 18 millimeters, then what you want to do is push the file slightly beyond the apex. And when you do that, the apex locator will give you a reading that you've gone beyond the apex, say 0.5 to 1 mm beyond the apex. Now retract the file again back to the working length and then recheck the file again. And when you check it the second time, it has to be what you measured earlier, for example, 18 millimeters. So you're going to retract the file short of the apex and then take it back to the apex and then remeasure it again. And when you do this 3 consecutive times, you have to have consistent readings. So 3 times in a row, and all 3 times it has to be the same measurement. And that's when you know that you are on the right track. So I'd say rather than rely on one reading alone, 3 readings, and if all 3 are consistent, then you know that you are on the right track. So in summary, these are the 6 protocols that can help you take more accurate readings while using the Apex Locator in everyday clinical practice. Like I mentioned, if you'd like a free PDF that tells you how to use the Apex Locator predictably in your clinical practice, then you can download one for free. I put the link in the description below. If you'd like to watch more videos on endodontics, then do check out some of the videos that are uploaded on my profile here. If you'd like to watch a video on endodontic irrigation, then do check out the next video that's coming out over here. I'll see you next week with another video. Till then, take care. Thanks for watching.